There you go, Mr. Chairman. You are live.
All right. Thank you, Carla. We'll wait just a moment or two. Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Carol, will you take roll, please?
Representative Bear,
Here.
Representative Burkhardt,
Here.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Here.
Representative Air,
Here.
Representative Gray,
Here.
Representative Heiner,
Here.
Representative Sherwood,
Here.
Representative Western.
He's excused, but when he comes in, he's here. He was
Okay.
here this morning. Yeah,
Chairman Greer.
here. Thank you.
Presently 8 here and 1 excused.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Carol. Good morning, everyone. Today, hopefully we've got 3 bills on our list. We can get through these. Senate File 82 will be first up, and then we'll hear from our good co-chair of Minerals, Senator Anderson, on Senate File 111, and then we'll take up Senate File 141. Representative Larson, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. We have the Joint Appropriations Committee Senate File 82 dealing with local impact assistance, which for those of you that may not totally understand that, if you have a large industrial project that comes before the Siting Commission into an area, the counties can be compensated for impacts of that project in various ways. And there's some history that goes with this. Is prior to 2015, what would happen is a project would come in, and then it would get built, and they would determine a baseline sales tax that impacted the county. And then anything over that, Mr. Chairman, you'll recall, anything over that would then revert back to the counties in impact aid. And we had a good chairman of revenue teach us a few years ago that we were actually being retroactive, or we were responding after the impacts had taken place. And so the sales tax for impact aid weren't coming into the county still after the project was done. And so I can still remember the wave graph that he showed us. And so what we done in 2015 is we changed that to say that impact aid could be compensated up to 2.75% of the projected costs of the project. And in the sales tax division between state and local, that 69-31% split, 31% going to the counties, the rest going to the state. That 2.75% would come out of the state share. And so that's been in place for a few years. And this bill, Mr. Chairman, comes back into the sales tax and use tax provision of that. And we're putting a few more sideboards on there to tighten up, kind of add some stability to what projects could be claimed as impact aid. And then in reviewing the funds that have come out and been distributed to the locals, I think the local counties would agree that this has been a huge improvement on their ability to get this. As we've reviewed this in appropriation committee, we think that we need to tweak that back a little. And what we're recommending is reducing the maximum percentage it would go to the locals from that 2.75% down to 2.25%. Now, it's important to note that when a community or a county comes to the Industrial Siting Committee, that they don't have to be, they're not required to allow the full 2.75, or if this passes 2.25, that's setting the cap and they can come down to that. We see that on an average that they're probably awarding, it's a little bit all over the board, Mr. Chairman, from anywhere from 100%. I'm going to guess probably an average of 60% or 60% across the board. I think that the struggle that the committee has had and the agency has had is that some of the things that have been brought before the commission as for reimbursement, maybe you have to say, maybe we could tighten that up a little bit. So today, Mr. Chairman, when I go through this, the first half of this bill, pages 1 through 5, are in the sales tax, and 6 through the rest of the bill are in the use tax, identical. Okay, so I'm just going to use the first 5 pages. The definitions are all in those first 5 pages. And so, Mr. Chairman, what in committee, if you'd go with me to page 3, the new language in there is that the total dollar amount for impact aid needs to include specific findings of fact detailing the basis for the total dollar amount of determination. So they're going to have to validate the request for impact aid has a basis. And then we're changing further on down that page, we're changing that from 2.76% down to 2.25%. On the next page, we're giving the Industrial Siting Council a little more direction on determining the distribution ratio, and that they can consider the extent and location of unmitigated impacts, the populations of the affected counties, cities, towns, including the disproportionate impacts on smaller communities. We felt that they had that ability. They wanted a little more specific to where they could point to it, so we've done that. When we talk about unmitigated impacts, Mr. Chairman, we as legislators and those who apply say what is an unmitigated impact, and we put a definition in there on page 5, and it's an expense incurred by the county for or city, town for, and if you go to page 6 for A, B, and C, and it's important to note that you can't, we're saying that you can't double, and I don't want to use the word double dip. I don't know the right word for it, but if the mitigation, let's say for a road or some sort of utility diversion or some of that is covered by another entity, they can't come back and claim for impact aid on it. Then on C, it talks about medical services, law enforcement, the typical stuff that you would expect to see a community or county come back and say is an unmitigated impact. But this does exclude expenses for which a county, city, or town previously received an impact aid assessment payment unless the county, city, or town can demonstrate the expense are new or ongoing. So it might be a fire engine. We've got a huge, we've had a new facility come in. They're concerned about response time from the fire department, and they provide a new fire engine, and then they do an expansion on the project. It would be hard, you may have a better example. I'm just saying that may be one that would do there. So, Mr. Chairman, that's really some of the sideboards in what we do in the bill, and would be happy to try and answer any of your questions.
Committee, any questions for Representative Larson? Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Representative, I see that originally the reduction was down to 2%. And then under the engrossed copy, it's back up to 2.5. what was, can you give me an idea of what the thinking was on 2% and then the thinking on the 2.25%?
Well, we thought the 2% was pretty good, but there's a couple of thugs sitting in the back of the room here that persuaded us that maybe that was a little too much, and so we compensated and come up to 2.25.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll go with Sherwood or Representative Sherwood and Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you help me understand the conversation behind defining unmitigated impact in the bill, so codifying it versus allowing the council determine what those rules are as cities or counties apply?
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Sherwood. It is indeed, as I tried to, and probably didn't do it very well, trying to put a little more sideboards. We seen some expenditures for things that we just would question. The Department of Environmental Quality said, you know, that's stretching maybe what an unmitigated impact would be. And so just trying to define that a little bit. It's kind of a we want to take care of the counties that are being impacted by this stuff. We also have to realize that that's coming out of the state's portion of sales tax. And so we want to deal with it appropriately, but not deprive the state from its share as well. I don't know if I said that right.
You really didn't.
Thank you.
That's okay. Go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, I'm new at this, and this is a new subject for me, so I'm just asking you to kind of clear something up for me. As I read the bill and I find this new language on page 3 and 8, based on the findings of fact, we're talking about the expenditures of the mitigating and unmitigating factors, but what about the construction cost? Where is that determined at to apply that 2.25% to?
Well, and I think, you know, fortunately, you've got subject matter expert on here with Representative Heiner, but when you come in here and an industry comes in to build like a gas plant or something of that nature, they pretty well have a good idea of what the cost for that project is going to be coming into it as they allocate an appropriate, you know, as they, through their appropriation process, determine what this project is going to call. And in all of the public hearings, they'll tell you that these are our estimated costs. And so they'll base that off industry and review of the siting council to say this is what we think the estimated cost for the project is going to be.
Go ahead, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quick follow-up. It looks like it's applied to material costs. Is that like it sounds, just materials and not the actual construction costs? Thank you.
Anything, Mr. Chairman, clarify if could, anything that sales tax would apply to.
Okay. Any other questions, committee? Yeah, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, you mentioned something about the payments have been 60% of the cap in average. Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well,
and then a related question, I guess these payments only apply to projects that would come under the Industrial Siting Council purview. Is that correct?
Yep, Mr. Chairman. So I'll just share with you a few examples, and I'm using Lander math, and so the 60% certainly could be off here, but I'll just read you some examples here. Is on the Gateway West project in Carbon and Sweetwater County, the material costs were $476 million. The maximum impact aid could have been $13 million. 59% was awarded, so $7 million. But yet on the Boswell Springs wind project, the maximum impact assistance could have been $12 million, and it was fully awarded $12 million. So that was 100%. Then the TP Flats Carbon Wind project was 76% awarded of $9 million. Converse County had a wind project with 75% of $8 million. Then you come down to the Trans-West Express, that power line that went through Carbon and Sweetwater was only awarded 34% of the available funds. So you can see it's a little bit across the board. And I think, Mr. Chairman, my review of this is it really kind of depends on the project. Some of those power line projects don't seem to have the unmitigated impact that perhaps a power plant or a wind project has. And it seems that those seem to be a little bit lower.
Okay. Representative Bear, you good? All right, committee. All right. And with that, I think Representative Larson, that was sort of, there's a little bit of a common theme in those questions is, we're putting a little more specificity in here instead of allowing this to rulemaking. Was that something that the siting council had requested?
Not so much the siting council, Mr. Chairman, as the department.
Okay, thank you. All right. Representative Larson, if you'll sit by, I assume Colin McKee would like to speak. And I assume Luke is just probably watching, but he's more than welcome to join. We could bring Colin in.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, here he comes.
Good morning, Mr. McKee. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. And actually, Luke, Deputy Director Esch would like to come into this meeting. I think we're both planning to be here to answer questions for the committee. So if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, it looks like they're working on that.
Here he comes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so which one of you are going to be speaking?
Mr. Chairman, I can start and then certainly turn it over to Colin for questions. To begin, my name is Luke Esch. I'm the Deputy Director of DEQ. With me today is Colin McKee. He's the Administrator of the Industrial Siding Division. Director Parfit sends his regrets for being unable to be here today. I would say I think Representative Larson did a great job going over all the points in the background of the project or of the bill. And we would certainly stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions of the department? So Mr. Ash, I'll ask that same question regarding some of these provisions that are being added with the bill, and that's really not the significant component, but it all adds up, was to give some more, I guess, more teeth, more guidance in statute to the council. Was that, how did that discussion come about?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good way to characterize it, is just it gives a good additional guidance to the council on how to consider the unmitigated impacts that are impacting these communities. So I think it provides a little more direction and a little more, as Representative Larson said, some sideboards on what should be considered.
Okay, go ahead, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious if we could get examples of the unmitigated impacts that a local government might ask for that is then determined to not be valid.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, I don't think there's a lot of examples that have happened in the past, and Mr. McKee can certainly correct me on this, but I think it's more of a preventative measure. As Representative Larson was indicating, if there's communities that are being impacted by several different industrial projects, so several different, for example, wind farms that are being constructed in proximity to that community, it's possible in one application they may be requesting funding for upgraded wastewater treatment facilities, since their facility shouldn't be able to accommodate the influx of new users on that system. But the next application that comes in, if they're requesting funds for that same wastewater system, I think that's a consideration that the council should be advised of and take into consideration when finding the specific findings of fact for what impacts should be awarded for that project.
Representative Larson,
Mr. Chairman and Representative Sherwood, I think particularly some of the things that we heard examples of is when you get into communities and there's some funds available, what are truly impacts from this, and what are wants of a community? Do we really need to have an addition to the museum and claim it under as an impact from this? Do we need to have Veterans War Memorial in the city park, that now we could get through this impact aid. Is that actual, and so it's trying to put some sideboards on and prevent worthy projects, but certainly probably aren't worthy of unmitigated impacts.
Okay. All right. Any questions go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Ash, I'm a little bit confused. I don't see anything in the bill regarding wind and solar, and I've heard testimony about wind and solar, but when I look at the fiscal note, it's there, our LSO says for projects other than wind and solar. Is there a different ratio or payment amount for wind and solar projects versus other projects?
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear. No, it's the same formula based on my understanding. There is a provision that says, there's a separate provision that says wind facilities over 30 turbines are automatically subject to jurisdiction of the Industrial Siting Council, regardless of cost. The current industrial siting threshold for an industrial facility is $277 million. So there's industrial facilities, and so anything over that has to get an industrial siting permit. Any wind energy facility greater than 30 turbines that must go through the industrial siting process regardless of cost, as well as it was added, I believe 2 years ago, the solar projects that exceed a certain megawatt threshold or exceed a certain, I think it's over like 100 acres, are automatically subject to jurisdiction. The impact assistance is still based on the 2.76% of the material cost for those projects.
Representative Heiner will be able to give you a full lesson on all that. Yeah. Okay. Any further questions for the department? Okay. Mr. McKee, are you good? Do you have anything to add?
No, Mr. Chairman, nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. We'll keep moving on here. We'll move to the County Commissioners Association.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the county commissioners. I guess I'm the chief thug. Appreciate the good humor this morning. Mr. Chairman, I am joined by Mr. Brian Lovett, who is a Laramie County commissioner and certainly has plenty of experience with this particular topic.
Just a little, right?
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I do agree with Representative Larson that this program as it stands today is an incredible improvement over the pre-2015 approach. It certainly allows for counties and as well municipalities to address the unmitigated impacts that come along with industrial development. And that industrial development is getting larger and more expensive as time goes on, as we see more wind projects in particular coming into many parts of our state. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my association agrees that there are a couple of needs. One of those is accountability, and that accountability is not only accountability at the local level in terms of my members as well as the municipalities, but that accountability also has to reside with the Industrial Siting Council and them helping us understand some of their decisions. I think you would hear from many of my members that they feel some of the decisions have been rather arbitrary in their nature and approach to making some cuts. So again, accountability is good, and that goes to all parties, and this bill works to address some of those. Mr. Chairman, I think the other part of this is that we agree there should be a definition of unmitigated impacts. And my association asked the department in 2009, we wrote a letter to them and asked them to undertake rulemaking to do just that thing. It's taken time. They haven't got there, but they are of course, in that process and are trying to address some other things, perhaps as part of a rulemaking package that they might pursue. Mr. Chairman, I've got some other comments, but before I get to those, I'd really like to let Mr. Lovett offer some perspective from his experience and knowledge about some of the numbers that you've heard and others that we might bring forward for your consideration.
Yep, that's fine. Go ahead, Mr. Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner
Brian
Lovett,
Lovett, Laramie
sorry.
County Commissioner. I do want to recognize there's been a unprecedented amount of impact assistance awarded over the last, now going on probably 4 to 5 years. And that was concerning in my other role. We had not seen that amount awarded in the past, but I think you have to recognize the unprecedented number of projects that have come through in the last 4 years, and also the scale of those projects. We have never seen this level of industrial siting activity in the state, at least under impact assistance and industrial siting jurisdiction in the past. And so recognizing that's a good thing. There's a lot of activity in the state right now. I do want to reiterate only 65% of the statutory maximum that has been awarded as projects have gone through industrial siting. The Industrial Siting Council has done their job and has not awarded the maximum amount and has not awarded necessarily what was asked for in every case. I did want to point out the Boswell Springs project was referenced. That was the first project that came through under this new funding mechanism. And I think both the local governments and the Industrial Siting Council were at a little bit of a loss on how this worked and how to handle it. And so there was a maximum amount awarded in that case. And I think that was a learning experience. And I think that's part of what we've been going through as a learning experience with a new system. As always, they're not perfect and they have to be tweaked as you go along and figure out how they work. I do want to recognize the agency is doing rulemaking, specifically addressing the definition of unmitigated. That has been a problem for the council. It's been a problem for local government. The definition in statute is very vague. And so putting it in rulemaking where we can kind of define the box and everybody knows what fits and what doesn't, I think will smooth the process.
So Commissioner Lovett, just in, because this was a little bit of a concern of mine. So now we're putting it in statute effective July 1. If this passes, how is that? Does that impede or does that help the process that's ongoing with the rulemaking?
Mr. Chairman, I guess in my feeling is that this is somewhat unnecessary at this point, the bill. I think we've learned we're working on addressing, we certainly spent a lot of time last year working this issue. And I think lessons have been learned and we're moving toward solutions. And so that would be my thought is that the bill may not in fact actually be necessary at this point.
Go ahead, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was my concern are we premature with this bill? Because you're just now trying to figure it out. You're just now with your rulemaking, you're figuring out the waters and where you're at on your rulemaking and how it's working. So my question to you is, do you guys as county commissioners, boots on the ground, is the bill premature?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, that would certainly be my opinion.
Yep. Go ahead, continue, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other thing I wanted to point out is, the 2.76% that was historically there, that is the entire state share of sales tax. And that's why it's based on the material cost. It's those things that would be taxed. That's always been in there. I would like to see it continue to be that amount. I think we need the flexibility. I think you have to recognize the history of the program. This started in the 1970s, and it was based on, we still use the Gillette effect. When the coal mines came in, looking back to, and I had an interesting time at the agency, I went through the archives, 132 boxes of records from the industrial siting program. And very interesting looking at Mayor Enzi of Gillette working on industrial siting processes because of the coal mine effects on that town. up to him climbing the water tower every night in the summer and looking in the top to see how much water he had because his population had exploded. I mean, the town parks were full of tents. So that was the genesis of this program being developed in the first place, was to help municipalities address those kind of effects. And I would hate to see that flexibility go away. I realize there are some places where that level of assistance isn't required anymore. But certainly we have areas of the state that still have municipalities that are small enough and do not have the capacity to deal with a project of that scale. So the other thing I wanted to point out, I've talked about it a little bit, is I want to recognize, and it may be a very small point, but these funds are diverted from the general fund, not taken from the general fund. So it's sales tax that comes through, revenue actually sends it a different direction rather than sending it to the general fund. So it's not actually taken out of the general fund.
I'll let you and Representative Larson go out in the hallway and wrestle over the significance of that.
Mr. Chairman, the other thing I wanted to mention was the issue of redundancy or double dipping was addressed. And I wanted to clarify that. So we've had a lot of activities in some relatively small areas here of late. So especially with wind, where they really cluster. And so a number of the same municipalities, county governments have been impacted in a short period of time. And so when those unmitigated impacts are assessed as they're going through the permitting process, and I, as the administrator, actually advised them to, they came and asked and said, well, we asked for this in the last project, but it's going to be an impact from this second one as well. And the issue is you never know what is going to actually get constructed. If these projects were a guarantee when you came through the industrial siting process, that would be a different thought process, but you never know whether things are actually going to come to fruition. So I advised them, if they had serious needs, they should build it into every project, because otherwise it may not be addressed. Now, whether there should be a process to eliminate it once construction starts on a project, do you go back? And I don't believe we really have a process that's formalized to go back and do some type of clawback.
Go ahead, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in that scenario, wouldn't that be taken care of in some cases of the 100% versus the 60%? So you wouldn't be funding at 100%. You would be funding at 100% if that project came to fruition versus a 60%, perhaps?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, that is correct. In many cases, those unmitigated impacts are not fully funded, so it may not be an issue.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we'll go Duncan and then Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This proposed amendment that we have from you guys would, following back on my previous question about this bill being premature, if we were to adopt this full amendment, how would you feel about the bill then? Would it make you happier? It would be acceptable, or are you still thinking it's still premature?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, I'll be honest, we don't like the bill in any case. That said, I'm trying to be helpful and find a spot where we're not impacting the communities as heavily as this approach does. And Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I do have some additional comments, and I'll go through that amendment, explain what I'm trying to accomplish.
I think I'll do is we'll get general questions for Commissioner Lovett with his expertise, and then we need to get moving, and we'll come into your specific concerns and recognizing the harsh rule that our good appropriators have to do. So, okay, go ahead. Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a bill up, so apologize if this was said. It's actually for Representative Larson. What was the general fund distribution, say, the last 2-3 years? Approximately.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray. I'm not sure that I can give you some impact aid amounts, I'm not sure that I understood your question in total. When you say the general fund distributions for impact aid, is that?
So, yeah, so Representative Larson, what we can do is, it's going to vary, Representative Gray, on however many projects are coming in at that point in time. So do you have, I assume we have a 15-year history, well, 2015, 5. So what do we got, a 5-year history on this that we could get?
Mr. Chairman, if I can, the department did provide the Joint Appropriations Committee a report in December, which is available online. I'm happy to send a link.
Mr. Chairman, since 2018 through 2025, the maximum amount or the amount awarded was 78 million. Okay. And the amount available to be under the 2.75% was 126 million. Okay, so the average of that, I said 60 is 65%. And again, that was the reason we were recommending that it drop down from 2.75 to 2.25, is because those entities coming into the state, as they're projecting what their costs are going to be, they have to take into consider this impact aid. And so if we can save them a little additional costs, and we're still covering, if we can see the history there and we can see that we would still be covering the impacts to the counties, we thought that was a reasonable approach.
I get your question. Yeah. Okay. Why don't we go ahead, Representative Bear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeremiah, Mr. Eman, would you say that you're more concerned about the flat percentage decrease or the other sideboards that are being put in this bill? And a kind of related question is, how many projects would be affected at that? Representative Larson mentioned several, only one was funded at 100%, so it wouldn't seem like the reduction in percentage would affect too many of those projects.
Go ahead, Jim.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ayer, it is the percentage that causes my members the most grief in that reduction. Relative to your second question, those projects that the good representative just mentioned, $78 million awarded in impact assistance. So it's important to note that that's on $4.5 billion worth of development that was to take place. So you can imagine the sort of impacts that come with that and the reason for that. At the 2.25% as it stands right now, over the course of the last fiscal year, that would have impacted one project, and that's the Chinner Unit 8 in Sweetwater County. So they would have been eligible for less than the council awarded. There are other projects that are close, but just below that threshold based on the cut that this proposes. Over the course of the past 36 months, you see one other project, the Boswell Springs project, was awarded at that 100%. So that also would have been caught in there. But the project awards range from 14% up to 100%. And I think it's important to note that it's not only the council that is awarding less than the percentage. My members and the municipalities are not always asking for 100%. Sometimes they ask for more, but it's not always at that level.
Okay. Okay, let's get moving. So do you have?
Mr. Chairman, sensing the urgency, I just have
Well, no, Representative Hunter has a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question for Mr. Reimer. We heard that some of the impact assistance over the past few years was significant. It was $70 or $80 million. That is from the state's portion of the sales tax. So did the counties receive their portion of that sales tax? And so this was in addition to the portion that the county received. So that impact for unmitigated and mitigated was significantly higher than that. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, the local governments do receive the remainder of their distribution. And the idea behind this program is that local governments wouldn't have the resources without that state aid to address these impacts. And I would call them state impacts at the local level.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just a few other things. This isn't just a few counties that have benefited from this program. 13 counties over the course of the last 14 years have benefited from this, small and large, and with wind and solar moving to new places, the impacts, if they haven't come to your communities, will in the future. We've talked a lot about the percentages. I won't go into more of that. The threshold is important here, as is the overall level of these projects. Mr. Chairman, I did propose an amendment. It does three things. And of course, there are duplications through here. The first one is on page 3, line 12. And this goes to the specific findings of fact that the Industrial Siting Council would be responsible for providing relative to its determinations. That is an important provision of this bill. I will concede that. It's important for my members and the general public to understand the decision-making that the agency, or in particular, the Industrial Siting Council, is making. That's the accountability that I was talking about there. I'm just asking that you add a little bit more to that provision, that it also say that they should provide their justification for rejecting in whole or part any application. Again, that will help us better prepare applications that come before the Industrial Siting Council. We can understand how they're making those decisions. Right now, as I said, many of my members think that some of their decisions are rather arbitrary. You know, I've seen where the council has approved half of a fire truck. How do you buy half of a fire truck in order to deal with things? And we need to better understand that. Mr. Chairman, the major amendment here is that rather than adopting the straight 2.25%, you adopt a tiered system. So for the smallest projects, you would be eligible at the full 2.76%. The idea being that those projects don't generate as much sales and use tax, so you might need more resources in order to address the industrial impact. But as the project gets larger, to Representative Heiner's point, there is more local revenue available, and we can better address those. So it tiers it down. It actually, in my proposal, goes down to 1.75%. So it goes below. I think the other value of the proposal is that it sets a maximum that local governments would be eligible for. The current bill doesn't do that. And so if you take those billion-dollar projects, and that's what the second document is designed to try and show you what this affects, is that the maximum would be an award of $26 million for $1 billion project. Under the current system, we would be eligible for $42 million. So this proposal cuts off, $16 million in its approach. So I'm asking you to consider that as an alternative to what was presented in the bill. Mr. Chairman, the other proposal that I have for you is on the back of that page. It goes to page 10, line 23. This bill contemplates that it would impact any impact assistance payments for projects approved on or after the effective date of this act. The problem for my members is we have ongoing applications in the process, and this bill could affect the amount and will require both the agency and local governments to retool applications because we're now subject to these lower thresholds. So all we're asking is that if the project is already in the process, that it should be subject to the existing rules, and moving forward, it would be subject to the new approach. Mr. Chairman, with that, I stand for any questions. Appreciate your consideration.
Committee, any questions? Yep, I think we understand the amendment pretty well. Okay. Let me find who in attendance wishes to testify. Old friend out there, I see. So, okay, we got one person online. Come on forward, Chris, and then we can bring in the person with their hand raised. Carla, I can't. Is it Justin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it's Justin Schilling. I'll bring him in.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Things have very quickly in the last 3 years. I believe it's on.
There you are.
Okay.
Out of practice.
Thanks, Representative. And you'd think I'd never done this before. I'm used to speaking through red lights. It never bothered me before. Thank you. $51 million has been approved and is going out the door. $51 million in FY 19, 20, and 21. $51 million that I would argue represents money from the general fund. So I don't want folks to think that this is not a lot of money. No one appropriated that $51 million. I voted for it and 6 people on the council voted for it within state statute. And that's how that money went out. So I just want the committee to be aware, because this council gets lectured regularly by the Appropriations Committee about how much money we may or may not be spending. And in fact, the past chairman of the committee described it as my money, meaning the state's money that was going out without appropriation. So I just wanted you to be aware that of that 51 million, it's gone to 6 counties in the last 3 years. I believe on the order of 24 million has gone to 1 county out of that 51 in the last 3 years. Again, the council will do what we can to be mindful of the state's revenue circumstances and distribute money in a responsible manner. But local governments typically ask for the maximum. When they say they don't, in the last few years, they come in at, a few bucks short of 100%. And these are, I think, rational requests by local governments. I can understand why the counties would like to keep the law largely as it is. I do too. It's fine by me. It's just not much fun to get lectured by the Appropriations Committee about what the council is doing with the state's money. So again, neither for nor against, simply on. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them or just get out of the way.
Any questions? Go ahead, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Boswell, thanks for coming in. I've always had questions about this statute, and one of mine is, it's almost like autopilot. I mean, and I hope you're not taking it personally. It's just, we've got to get a handle on what's going on here. And so I would ask you, this whole structure, do many states do this where they have a statute where a percentage basis of industrial siting projects can be placed to, can be given to counties or localities via a vote of a unelected board? It seems like, I'm just wondering if this is a common practice, because it seems pretty unique. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, candidly, I'm the wrong person to ask that. I'm not a student of this, although I can tell you that I've been watching the industrial siting statutes as they first came into being in about 1975. And you go back to 1975, and it was the project proponent that was paying impact assistance payments to local governments. That has changed dramatically since then. But now it comes out of what we can describe as the state's share of the sales taxes. But honestly, Representative, I can't tell you how other states do it.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Boswell, thank you for being here and appreciate your testimony. We talk a lot about the unmitigated impacts of the counties and municipalities. Is there ever any consideration for unmitigated impacts for the state, such as the increased maintenance on the roads and infrastructure of the state for these large projects, that we are giving up our portion of the sales tax and not being able to support those kind of increased costs?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's an awareness on the council that anything that is distributed or that is approved in terms of impact assistance payments to local governments is then a reduction in what's available to the state to answer the state's needs, whether it be for roads or anything else. It's a balancing act, without a doubt. And for
has-been legislators like me who have a particular concern with the state's general fund and state appropriations. Perhaps we argue on the council to perhaps reduce the impact assistance payments, and perhaps we don't prevail in those votes on the council.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you've been on the council for a number of years, Mr. Boswell, and a lot of these projects entail heavy loads going across the state roads as they bring equipment in and all the construction and everything. So has there ever been any consideration, a discussion about the impact on the maintenance of our state roads and highways for these projects?
Mr. Chairman, to the extent that there are road use agreements and the like, there is input to the Industrial Siting Council from well over a dozen state agencies. There are agreements that need to be formalized between the project proponents and usually local governments, but also state governments in terms of use of roads. Where are if you're talking about big wind turbines and blades and such, where are those pieces of equipment going to be delivered? What route will they take getting to where they're going? That's an element of it. But in terms of overall, if something's going down a state highway, the impact to that state highway is generally not a consideration in industrial siting.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Schilling, ready?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Justin Schilling with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to testify this morning. In opposition to the bill, in favor of the county commissioner's amendment. Much like the county commissioners had testified to, and I'll keep my testimony brief. I know you're trying to make tracks on this one. This was a boomtown program, and we believe and we hope for the future of Wyoming that we'll find our way back into new boomtowns. By cutting that percentage and taking the top off of the capability of this program to fund particular communities that might have trouble shouldering the weight of a large industrial project coming in. We believe we cut off the opportunity we put ourselves in a position where we'd be backtracking on this in the future. Rare earth minerals, some of the carbon sequestration, some of the other bigger industrial projects that we're just now starting to explore in the state may happen in towns that don't have a lot of resources to be able to catch up with the needs of these projects. So while the council has done an excellent job of keeping the percentages, the actual percentage distributed very low, on average less than 2%, they're kind of doing their job in policing these applications, we believe, to the point where we don't see the benefit in taking the top off the program when it seems to be being properly administered. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would take any questions. And again, against the bill, but for the county commissioner's amendment.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Schilling. Any questions, committee? Seeing none? Okay. Was there anyone else that wished to testify on this bill? Okay, we'll close public testimony. However, Representative Larson, I'll let you have a brief rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just maybe push back a little bit in saying that we've greatly improved how counties are reimbursed for impact aid. It's been for a number of years, since 2015, and we've had a chance now to look back and say, of that percent that we're going to require industry to pay for impact assistance, was that amount sufficient, too much, or not enough? And we're saying the true up is that it was probably too much. We recommended 2%. We've come back to 2.25%. I think that still addresses the needs for the counties and locals, and it's saving costs for industries as they contemplate what their expenses are going to be for some of these projects. Mr. Chairman, I think on the question is whether you put this into statute and into rule, is a fair one, and we bounce back and forth on each discussion of that on the floor. We felt that having it in statute was worthy of consideration and would ask you to likewise consider favorably.
I have one quick question, so we got to get moving. I had Chairman Anderson sitting here all morning, so on page 10, line 23, the suggested change, that seems to be a good suggested change. You agree?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Representative Anderson. Okay, what's the committee's pleasure? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All right, committee, any general discussion? Okay. All right, ready to work the bill then? All right, so any amendments? Okay, I'm gonna go with Representative Heiner and I'll come this way this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would propose an amendment on page 3, bringing the 2.25 down to 2.0. And if with the second, I'd like to explain that. This
Okay,
impact.
yeah, we got a second. Go ahead, Representative.
This impact is for unmitigated impacts, but we need to tighten it up a little bit because it's been utilized, as we've heard testimony here, for wants rather than needs. Upgrading recreation centers, fixing parks. And I think the intent of the legislation was to provide for unmitigated impacts such as overtime for firemen, additional overtime for policemen and law enforcement and things like that. And so the whole state, we're trying to tighten things up a little bit, and this is an opportunity to tighten this up. Now recognize that the counties and municipalities still retain their portion of the sales tax. So they're getting increased revenue from these projects. But we're giving up the state's portion of this revenue. And we're not getting money for the state's unmitigated impacts, such as road usage and increased burden upon our agencies here and like the DEQ and things like that to administer these things. So I recommend we drop it down to 2% as the original intent by the Joint Appropriations Committee and tighten this up a little bit.
So with the movement in the second, that also would be a similar correction on page 8, line 18 with respect to the use tax.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Okay, Representative Duncan, comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How about the, what are your thoughts about the tiered system that the commissioners proposed? Going down as far as 1.75.
So we have the Industrial Siting Council, which we had the testimony here. That I believe that's their responsibility to tier it. As the projects get more expensive, then they should be able to recognize the amount of money that's available and make it appropriate for the needs and not the wants. So I would like to leave that to their purview to decide the amount there.
Okay, here's where we are. We're voting on removing that, moving the threshold from the 2.25 down to 2.0 in both places. Carol, you got that on page 3 and page 8. All those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Amendment's adopted. I don't hear that good out of this year. Okay. Any other amendments? And I would, committee, looking at the county commissioners amendment, the amendment page 3, line 12 and 8, line 12, I think are good. And maybe the one on the back page. Okay,
Yeah.
moved and seconded by Duncan. Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative.
Just to clarify, we're doing the page 3 line 12 and the page 8 line 12 changes, correct? That only those.
And Representative Gray, page 10, line 23, regarding the application being submitted rather than project approved.
Okay.
For which one's in effect. Okay. Any further discussion, question being called on the amendment? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that amendment is adopted. Any further discussion on the bill, committee?
Question.
A question being called, Carol, roll call vote for Senate File 82.
Just one clarification, we're doing page 10, line 23 also? Did you say that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Representative Bear,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
Aye.
Vice Chair Duncan, Representative Ayer,
Aye.
Representative Gray,
Aye.
Representative Heiner, Representative Sherwood,
No.
Representative Western, Chairman Greer.
Aye.
8 ayes, 1 no, do pass with amendments.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Yeah, thank you, Representative. All right. Our good co-chair from the Senate, please come forward. Next item is Senate File 111.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to present Senate File 111, School of Energy Resources Budget Submittal. I need to give you a little history of this budget before we do. The School of Energy Resources has been in existence for more than 12 years. 12 years ago, the university administration were discussing becoming a fine arts college. So the legislature decided that they would start the School of Energy Resources so that they could keep science, math, and engineering at the University of Wyoming. They funded it separately, started out about $20 million. The budget now is down to $16 million after 2 cuts. The SER also gets matching funds from industry and uses it for their projects. So the projects are mostly funded by industry with matching grants. The Energy Resource Council was formed to govern the School of Energy Resources, of which the co-chairs of the Minerals Committee sit on that ERC with industry leaders from around the country. It's an impressive group that administers the School of Energy Resources. So the Energy Resource Council was formed to administer the staff and scientists. There's 27 scientists, engineers, and 1 lawyer in the staff. And we have a very capable person that works that. We had 1 fellow from the beginning up till a year ago that ran the School of Energy Resources and did an incredible job of getting us into all kinds of different projects worldwide. We're really recognized worldwide as being a leader in energy development. We also pay for other disciplines in ag, law, engineering, and others in order to supplement our staff. So we will supplement somebody in ag, for instance, is for the soil work that we've been doing. Some of the projects are all related to energy. They're oil, gas, coal, wind, solar, hydro, and hydrogen. And then we recently took on a little rare earth minerals project to see if we can enhance our statewide rare earth minerals. Carbon capture is huge for us because we're trying to find some way to do carbon capture that we can put on power plants around this country to save our coal industry. A lot of interest worldwide on that carbon capture project. We have a project going on at the Integrated Test Center in Gillette, where 3 companies are working to show us that they can do carbon capture in high volume. Everybody can do it in low volume, but we want high volume out of the stack that you capture all the carbon. We also have the high bay on the University of Wyoming campus, and mostly what's going on right there is reservoir engineering. We're doing reservoir engineering for the Middle East and for Wyoming, and the Middle East is paying for all of it. Which brings me to the budget. We've had a budget, and it's been separate from the block grant for the University of Wyoming for these 12 years. But every time they change an administration, the new administration comes in and doesn't know that. And they read the statute and it doesn't say it. So they assume that it's their budget. So
co-chairman Cindy Crane and I have had many discussions with the university presidents and the provost about whose budget this is and who handles it. So what we decided we'd do is put it in statute to say the school energy resources budget will be approved by the Energy Resource Council and given to the governor. And of course, a copy given to University of Wyoming as a courtesy. So that is all the bill is, and it's on page 2, line 11 and 12. School of Energy Resources will submit its budget to the governor after approval by the Energy Resource Council created in the subsection, and that we would give a copy to the University of Wyoming. We've had multiple discussions with the current administration at University of Wyoming, and they are very good. No problem whatsoever with this. But what the fear is that the next administration, which we've been through 3 so far in the last 12 years, the next one might not be so understanding. So we want to get it in statute and eliminate the discussions in the future. So that's it for this bill.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Chairman Anderson? Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Anderson, thank you for your testimony, and I really like your bill here. I think that's a great direction to be going. I just have a question about your testimony. As a new legislator, I'd like you to kind of expound for me on this reservoir engineering. I know maybe we could have a side conversation, but if you've got a moment, just share.
We could actually, and probably should have Mohammed Puri come in and give us just an overview of some of the exciting things they're doing. Yeah,
I really think that'd be a good idea because it is huge what the reservoir engineering is doing for the Middle East and for Wyoming. He can show you how to pull more oil out of the rock. And that's what that is all about, is how to move more oil through the reservoir to your well.
And leave the water there. It's amazing what they do.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So I would recommend talking to Dr. Puri.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay.
Is anybody else wishes to testify on this? I don't see anybody online. Oh, yeah, Mr. Obermuller. I haven't been mean to anybody today, so please come forward.
I just feel so welcome, committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pete Obermuller, Petroleum Association of Wyoming. We support the bill, Mr. Chairman. The work of SCR is very important to us. And since you're going to be mean to me anyway, Mr. Chairman, and I know you like to have your committee meetings in Casper, I would actually suggest having a meeting in Laramie and tour SCR. Their 3D visualization center, if you haven't seen it, outstanding, unbelievable. And anyway, we support it. We would like the funding model to match the governance model, and thank the senator for bringing it.
You bet. Yeah, and I think it's been a while since we've toured those facilities in the high bay, and it's a good recommendation for us to get, because we have so many new members. It'd be a good idea. Okay, Mr. Detai.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, feel free to make fun of me too. I'm here, and we've been socially distanced. I think my wife would appreciate that too. So, hey, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the Wyoming Mining Association supports the bill, and I would stand for questions.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Detai? For his wife works for the Department of Health. So, okay. Very good. And we'll close public testimony. With public testimony being closed, I'm going to add a little bit of color. I don't see anybody for the next bill up, and I don't have anything else in the hopper, so we'll just finish with this bill today. But the issues are a little bit more than even a little more dire than what the chairman was saying. We've used the School of Energy Resources as a place and it's a transition. They've try to get from shelf out into the field, and they've done a really good job with all their projects. If you recall, last year we set aside the budget funds for carbon research and for the carbon safe project and that flameless combustible oxygen, and I say that wrong all the time, project with DOE, which was absolutely amazing, and ended up partnering with Black Hills Energy up in Gillette. I think there's a lot of focus there. Well, those funds were there and the UW trustees made a play, tried to grab them all. And then they were going to dole those legislatively appropriated projects out of their general matching fund block that they have. And Senator Anderson and Cindy Crane and myself was involved in a couple of meetings. No, that's not what we're doing. This was set up by the legislature. It's a way for us to take our policy and find that and move that through the system. And there's, I had to fight to get this committee or this bill out of certain people's hands, Mr. Chairman. So we've got to fight on the floor with this. So anyway, those are my comments. So any discussion?
Are we about to vote?
No, if you get, yeah, thank you, Representative. Anybody wish to move this? What's the committee's pleasure? Moved by Duncan, second by Burkhart. Okay, discussion? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate work of the senator and work of the chairman on this issue. I am going to be voting no. But I want to say this work is very important. But I think having one request emanating from the university, even though this is a separate program and that's going to remain in place despite what this bill passes, I think having one request store encourages efficient allocation of resources, and that back and forth, I think, helps to encourage an understanding of the entire request from the university. So the people of the state of Wyoming have been very generous with state aid, and I think it's important for the university's request to be sent by one request store, not that there shouldn't be some full consultation with the school energy resources, but I don't think they should be the submitter of this one. Because the problem too with this is when does this end? Any program then can be submitted separately. I understand it's a little bit different, and appreciate the work. I just wanted to explain my no vote, and I support program fully. So thank you.
Right. Any other comments, committee? Okay, sensing you're ready to vote. Question being called. Carol will take a roll call vote on Senate File 111.
Representative Bear.
Aye.
Representative Burkhart.
Oh, gee. Aye.
Vice Chair Duncan.
Aye.
Representative Air.
Aye.
Representative Gray. Representative Heiner. Representative Sherwood.
Aye.
Representative Western. Chairman Greer.
Aye.
8 ayes, 1 no, do pass.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'll find some time we visit about site locate. This committee would like to tour a Trona mine too, so.
Let's just do a revolving meeting and go Laramie, Trona.
One of our meetings will be in.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's just do a circle.
Yeah. So with respect to Senate File 41, I just thought I would squeeze this in. I'm don't know why this really came to our committee. It's but and I don't see any sponsors available for it. I don't have anything else in the hopper, so I'll just sit on this for right now, and then I'll talk with Senator Perkins and see what we'll hear it on Monday. And if I don't get anything else, I guess we could meet Monday and hear this bill and maybe discuss amongst ourselves interim topics. So
Today is the deadline.
what's that?
Today's the deadline. Really? No.
Yeah, but that's for the public to submit them. If you're on this committee, we're gonna talk about interim topics. And so don't worry about that.
Mr. Chairman.
So,
I
yeah,
assume you want me to format 111.
if you want to, go ahead.
I will.
Yeah, so, okay, well, Carol, we'll adjourn the meeting officially, and so